My name is Jim Finney. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at North Central State College. And the topic tonight is college financial aid. And that's kind of a very broad topic. And I think, first of all, we'll just give you some general information about financial aid. And we'll talk about then the application process. Financial aid is really secondary to the choice of going to school. I mean, you don't need financial aid unless you're going to college. And so you really need to make up your mind, yes, I want to go to college, and then figure out how to pay for it. Students don't have to go to college. You know, there are plenty of other options. They can go to work. They can go in the military service. A lot of students take a year off between high school and college to kind of figure out what they want to do. And they usually refer to that as a gap year. And when they, I think even one of President Obama's daughter, his oldest daughter, she was accepted at Harvard, but she took a year off to get some things, you know, figured out before she went off to college, and then she could be a much better student. Getting college straight first and then figuring out how to pay for it, and that's where financial aid comes in. And financial aid, by the way, is any help for paying for college that comes from a source other than your family. Anything that comes from the family is not considered financial aid, and sometimes it makes a difference to understand that. The FAFSA is the federal aid application. You know, that's an acronym that stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid, but you don't have to know that. It's just the FAFSA is the form. And it used to be a paper form where you would fill it out and darken it in little bubbles, and you would mail it off to some place in Illinois, and it would take a month to process. Now it's an online form, and it's processed immediately once you hit the submit button. So it's much faster. It's better than the paper version because they have logic built into it that if you make an obvious error, it's going to say, well, this doesn't really make sense. And it also skips questions that obviously don't apply to you. So the online is much better. Last year, they came up with a phone app that you could apply on your phone. And each year, you know, I fill out a FAFSA, and I always send it to a different department at Harvard because that's my, you know, my goal. If I come back in another life, I'm going to Harvard. But you know, I did it this year on my phone, and it was really easy. So you know, you download the app from you know, the App Store if you've got Apple or Google Play or whatever. It's called My Federal Aid app, and it's really good. But if not, then you know, certainly you can use the website and
Do you still have it linked up where you can put in your stuff for like the IRS and it just transfers everything over? Yeah.
You know, the FAFSA asks a lot of questions. It asks questions about the student and the student's family, and it asks questions about family income, basically taken from income tax returns. And a couple of years ago, you know, they came up with a process to transfer information directly from the IRS computer onto the FAFSA computer. They call it the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or DRT. And it works pretty well. I have 3 sons. My last one is a senior at the College of Worcester this year, and for all of them, you know, we've able to use the DRT. We've used it. It's worked wonderfully. It's saved a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the problems that the FAFSA has is that, you know, it's kind of confusing. And if you use the DRT, you can skip some of that confusion. And the form itself, when you're filling out the FAFSA, it will invite you to use the DRT, and it says, they'll ask you a couple questions and say, oh, it looks like you might be eligible to use the data retrieval tool. Do you want to do that? And of course you want to answer yes. Now, not everybody can use the data retrieval tool. Some people, if your parents are married and filed separately, they can't use the data retrieval tool because you know, they're looking for, you know, parents filing jointly, and then it works. But the students could certainly use the data retrieval tool. And speaking of that, the FAFSA for a regular, traditional college-age student is a 2-part form. There's a student's part and a parent's part. And it's important to remember that when you, the FAFSA is referring to you, it's talking to the student. It's the student's form. And so it'll ask, you know, are you married? And people say, 18 years old, that must be talking to my parents. No, they're talking to you, the student. And they'll be very explicit when they're talking about parents. You know, speaking of that, it used to be for parents, they asked for father's information and mother's information. Well, a couple of years ago, they said, well, you know, we've got a whole new world these days, and so we're going to ask for parent 1 and parent 2. And you have to determine, you know, which parent is 1 and 2. Now, I think you mentioned a divorce situation. Okay.
They never were married.
Okay.
So, what would it be? Just Tracy?
Well, you know, they ask
sorry.
about, you know, the parents' marital status. And, you know, if it never married is certainly one of the answers, the choices. But if parents are never married but living together, they're treated as being married for FAFSA purposes. Now, if you have parents that were married, divorced, and one of the parents is no longer in the picture, then they only want information about the parent who is in the picture, which is usually the custodial parent. Usually it's the mother. Not always, but that's the normal case.
So they've got, they have joint custody, really.
No, I have full.
You have full custody? Yeah.
So, do you live together? No, okay. Then it would be the parent that the student is living with
We couldn't use, that's my shack.
that, you know, but, you know, if there are any questions about any of this type of information, high school guidance counselors or financial aid administrators from colleges.
She doesn't get help at senior high.
Okay. Well, you know, you can certainly give us a call at North Central. Be glad to give you my card, and we can talk about it and figure out what the best alternative is, and really, you shouldn't say the best, but the correct alternative is. As far as getting back to a little bit about financially in general, every college, to work with figuring out how much students can get in financial aid, every college has to come up with a general cost of education. And the cost of education would be an estimate for the tuition, the price to sit in class and be educated, for room and board, how much it costs if you're on campus to live in the residence halls and eat in their dining halls, or if you live at home with parents, the schools would also actually have a budget for how much it costs to live at home with mom and dad. And then books, transportation expenses, and then a category of miscellaneous, like I suppose people want to buy a pizza on Friday night with their friends. So they'll take those 5 elements and put them together, and again, they are estimates, but come up with that cost of education. When you fill out the FAFSA form, the FAFSA main purpose is to come up with something they call an expected family contribution, or EFC. The EFC is the amount that by the federal formula they feel that the student and his or family should pay toward the cost of their college education for 1 school year. Now, if you're like most people, when you see the expected family contribution, you'll say, oh my goodness, there's no way we've got that kind of money. There's no way we can pay that. And that's, everybody says that, but that's an important figure because that's what colleges use to determine how much financial aid a student is eligible to receive. So what they're going to do is they're going to take that cost of education, the cost to go there, they'll subtract out the expected family contribution, the EFC, and they'll come up with the need, what's left over is the need. So cost minus EFC equals need. And that's an important formula because you can figure out how much it is. Now, the expected family contribution for federal student aid is the same no matter where you go to school. It's the same as North Central or at Harvard, Ohio State, University of California. It's the same. And it's not based on the school. It's just based on that information that's in the FAFSA. Now, the cost of all the schools is different. You know, North Central is probably the least expensive school around, and then it goes up. Ohio State is more expensive, but still reasonably priced. And then you get to places like Ashland and the Naz, they're more expensive. And then you get to Worcester, which is even more expensive. And so the need is going to be different at every school because the cost is different. The EFC is the same, but the cost minus CFC is the need, and the need is different at all those schools based on the cost. And the financial aid office is going to try to come up with a group of financial aid awards, is what they call them, to meet that need that the student has. A need, or financial aid, is kind of broken down in a couple different categories. There's gift aid, which is just a gift to the student to help them pay for school. Obviously the best type of aid. You want to maximize your gift aid. There's two major categories of gift aid, grants and scholarships. Like a lot of things in financial aid, these words don't have exact meanings. You know, how are grants different than scholarships? Well, sometimes the words are interchangeable, but grants are usually thought of as based upon a student's need. So if you have a need, a grant is a gift of money to help you pay for school. A scholarship could also be based on need, but very often is based on other factors besides that. I always tell people the best source of scholarships is the high school guidance counselors. And the reason for that is scholarships very often are provided by nonprofit organizations, and they've got money and they want to help society, so they want to help students go to school. How do we make these known? Well, all the schools, students go to school, the high school guidance counselor will send it to them. And so I always tell people, make the guidance counselor your best friend, because, you know, they get in scholarship information. A lot of times they make announcements on the PA or things like that. A lot of times the students blow that off. A lot of times students don't like to apply for scholarships because sometimes they require essays. You know, the Daughters of the American Revolution in Mansfield has a scholarship program. You probably have to write an essay about patriotism or American history, because that's the focus of their organization. I don't like to write essays. That's, you know, I'd rather watch TV or play games or something. So a lot of times, you know, guidance counselors are, you know, begging students, apply for the scholarship. So I certainly encourage you to do that. The Richland County Foundation, for those that live in Richland County, is an excellent source of scholarships. Their window is from like January 1st to April 1st. The scholarship doesn't require essays. You apply online. You don't have to provide a lot of information. I don't know why anybody who lives in Richland County wouldn't do that.
What's it called again?
It's the Richland County Foundation, and they have a website. You know, you can look up in the local phone directory. They're listed in there, and they'll be glad to give you information. They're a great organization. Other counties also have county foundations, so those are great sources of scholarships. Unfortunately, scholarships, sometimes you have to be like a TV detective. You remember the old show of Columbo? And Columbo was always saying, "Whoa, just one more question." Well, that's what you have to be with scholarships if you want to maximize that. You have to, you know, ask people, do you offer scholarships? A lot of fraternal organizations, such as the DAR, or the Elks, or the Eagles, or Eastern Star, all these organizations are a good source of that. A lot of employers give scholarships, unions, churches, so you just have to work on it. But, you know, it's free money.
When they do, like, when you sign up for the FAFSA, do they still do like the Pell Grant automatically?
Well, the Pell Grant it's a grant. It's based on your need, and it comes from filling out the FAFSA. And, you know, we said that filling out the FAFSA does a couple of things. One gives you EFC. The other thing, it determines your eligibility for a Pell Grant. And it's based on your EFC, and then there are different Pell amounts. It's kind of like a golf score. The lower your EFC, the higher your Pell amount. And as the EFC goes up, because your family might have more resources than another family, then the Pell eligibility goes down. So once you get up around 5,500 to 6,000 in that range, you no longer are Pell eligible. Now some people think, well, if you're not eligible for a Pell Grant, you're not eligible for financial aid, and that's not true. Some people think the term financial aid means Pell Grant. Well, yeah, Pell Grant is a type of financial aid, but it's certainly not the only type. So we talked about grants and scholarships. The second type of financial aid is what's called self-help financial aid, which means the student has to do something in order to get that aid. And there are two types of self-help aid. The first type is student loans. The second type is student employment. Student loans are a lot in the news. You hear people saying, oh, people have too much student loan money and people aren't paying their student loans back and student loans are bad. Well, student loans, a loan is a loan. You get money, you got to pay it back with interest. And the difference, the big difference with a student loan, than say a car loan or a mortgage loan, is that you don't have to have a credit rating in order to get a student loan. If you want to get a mortgage for your house, you've got to have some pretty good credit and established over the years in order to get that loan. Student loans, the only thing they look at is your history of paying back other student loans. And if you've never had a loan to have to pay it back, it's real easy to get a student loan. As long as you don't borrow more than you need, that the loan is being used to pay for educational purposes, you will handle that loan well, and it's good. Everybody I know who works in financial aid had a loan when they were in college. I certainly did. My kids all had student loans, and without those loans, they wouldn't have been able to go to school. So student loans are not bad. It's just some people use them in a bad way. They take out more than they need. They don't pay them back. So, yeah, and so, again, it's as long as you use the loan well, you'll be fine. Student employment is good. You can't get rich working on student employment, and students very often only work, small number of hours, 6, 10, 15 hours a week. You can't get rich on that. But if you've got a class at 11 o'clock and your next class is until 3, can't leave campus to go work someplace, you get one of those student employment jobs are usually pretty easy, and you get to make some contacts at the school. So would certainly encourage people to accept offers of that. Speaking of loans, there are parent loans. If the student still needs financial aid to pay for school after that's all put together, there are parent loans. And again, it's good and bad. If you need the money, it's good. I had a parent loan myself, and I paid it off because I didn't want to have that hanging over me. Some people take out more than they're needed, and unfortunately, some people get used to loan money, and you borrow more than what it takes to pay for school. You get used to money coming in and say, I got to get more loan money, and you get in trouble that way. So certainly, loans are not bad. We mentioned that parents filling out part of the FAFSA, and that gets to a topic of dependency. The federal government divides students into dependent students and independent students. A dependent student is considered to be a member of their parents' family. An independent student is not considered to be a member of their parents' family. They're considered to be a member of their own family. And dependency is determined by answers to about a dozen questions on the FAFSA. There's a dependency question. The first one asks you, were you born before January 1st, 1997? If you were, you're independent. If you weren't, you're not independent based on age. Students of a traditional college age, which means up to about 24, are considered to be dependent. Now, there are ways to be independent. If you're a veteran of the armed forces, doesn't matter how old you are, you're independent. If you're a member of the armed forces, doesn't matter how old you are, you're independent. If both your parents are deceased, you're independent. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you, since age 13, were in legal guardianship, you're independent. A number of things. And by the way, legal guardianship is not the same thing as legal custody. Most people who a court is assigned to be tended by another adult, 19 times out of 20, it's custody. The one time that and they're not independent based on definition, because it doesn't say custody, it says guardianship. One thing that sometimes gets people confused, it asks, do you have a child that you provide more than 50% of the support for? And some young ladies have children, but if they're not providing support for the child, at least so 51%, they're not independent. They're still dependent on their parents for FAFSA purposes. And how do you determine that? And our rule of thumb is, if the young lady is living at home with her mom and dad, she's dependent. If she's out living on her own, good chance she's independent, and we'll look a little bit more closely at that. Because she's living home with mom and dad, no doubt, are probably paying for the Pampers. They're probably paying for the student to have all sorts of living, and probably paying for all sorts of things, car insurance. So having a child doesn't make you independent. Having a child that you support makes you independent, and that's, you know, maybe a fine line, but it is a line. So there's dependency, and the dependent student, they're going to ask about parents' information, and the parent's family. When I ask how many members are the family, it's the parent or parents, the student, it's always that one, it's always going to be two at least, and then brothers and sisters that live at home and parents support. So that's the family of the dependent student. The independent student is going to be the student. If the student is married, if the student has children, it'd be that. The one thing about a dependent student, they'll ask how many of the members of your family are in college. They don't count parents in college as being in college. So if mom is going to school and they ask how many people are in school, it's probably just one, which would be the student. They don't count the parent. Why? Who knows? It's the federal government. Okay, we've talked a lot about general stuff. You have any questions about that stuff in specific? Okay. One thing I just want to mention, when you fill out the form, you got to use the name that's on your Social Security card. You know, if your name is John, don't put Johnny on there if John is on the Social Security card. If Johnny is what's on the Social Security card, don't put John. You know, they want whatever card is used there. They're not looking for pennies on the FAFSA. You know, they want you to round up or round down, depending on, you know, whichever is closer. So that's an important thing. If you got two extra figures on there, they think those are dollars, and so instead of $10,000, I think you got $100,000. So, you know, don't put pennies on the form. Okay, you fill out the FAFSA. The information goes to school. The school may tell you you've been selected for verification. And what verification is, it means the college is required by the federal government to double check some of the information the student put on the FAFSA. Why do they do that? It's easy to make mistakes on the FAFSA. And I admit it, I made a mistake on one of my kids' FAFSAs once. My wife has a 401k, and the most you can put into a 401k is $7,200 a year. Well, somehow I got a couple extra zeros on there, and they thought there was $72,000 in her 401k that was put in that year. So you can make mistakes, but you can correct them as well. It's very easy to make a correction. You go back to the FAFSA website and you make the correction. So if you're selected for verification, the college will tell you that. Please follow the directions. If you're selected for verification, the college will not award financial aid until verification is complete. We have a lot of students at North Central. We will hound. You know, we need this, we need this, we need this, and they don't do it. And sometimes it's a matter of just filling out a simple form, and for whatever reason they don't do it. Okay. That's general information about financial aid. There's a lot more stuff you can look at the handout I've given you. But I just want to go a little bit about the process. In order to log into the FAFSA website, and again, it is a federal website, you have to have credentials to log in. It's called a Federal Student Aid ID, or FSA ID. You go to a website, fsaid.ed.gov, and you fill it out. What do people have trouble with there? And sometimes people have trouble with that website. Number one, you got to read the directions. It is very specific, and it doesn't like you making up your own rules about what goes on there. It will not work. So you have to follow directions. If a student is a dependent student, the student needs an FSA ID, and one parent needs to have an FSA ID as well. And the FSA ID is used to log into the system. It's used to log out. When I say log out, it means sign the form. When you sign the form with that FSA ID, you are certifying that the answers we put here, to the best of our knowledge, are true and correct. So that's what it's used for. It's your electronic signature, but it's also the way you log in. It will ask for your cell phone number. It'll ask for your email number. The parent must have a unique email, which is different from the student. The student can't use the parent's email. The parent can't use the student's email. You know, emails are free. You go to Yahoo, Gmail, you get an email account. Don't use like a school email, like a lot of high school students have their own high school email, because after they graduate, they're going to turn that off. Well, for a lot of people, you know, college is a multi-year thing, and you don't want the federal student aid people saying, well, we sent this to your email. Well, I can't get to that email because that was my senior high email. So you gotta have to have an email that's not a school or a work email account. You don't absolutely have to have a cell phone number, but it certainly helps. Because one of the things, part of the process of getting FSA ID, they're gonna send a code to your phone, and you're going to have to enter it back on the computer to make sure that that's you and that's your phone number. And they're going to do the same thing with your email. They're going to send a code to your email, and you're going to have to enter it onto the computer. So that verifies for them that you are who you claim to be. So it's important. And again, some people, when they do that, they try to use their parents. They don't have it. No, it doesn't work.
This is a dumb question, but she got financial aid, right? So she would have had done all that. So when she signs up for SHAD, this would be completely different. It'll be
no, if you have an FSA ID, you use the same. Just like if you've got more than one student, a child that's your student, you use the same ID on all those, because that's you. And it's you no matter whether it's your own financial aid application or your kid's application. So that's the first step. You know, if the student doesn't have an FSA ID and you've gone, you know what, set the kid down at the computer and say, get this ID. So, and again, just follow the directions. They ask for questions on there for, you know, if you forget your ID, they'll ask you, you know, their challenge questions. Some challenge questions are better than others. Some, like, what's your favorite color? Well, that could change, or you don't even remember. Well, I kind of like blue that year, or I don't know. Like, what city you were born in, that's not going to change. You know, what was your high school mascot? You know, that's not going to change. So pick ones that don't change. They ask you to make up a couple of questions. Make up easy ones, you know, that you know, aren't going to be easy for other people to guess, but they're going to be easy for you to, so you don't have to type. So you get your ID, and then you log into the FAFSA system. Some of the information will already be there. They'll take it from the ID. You just fill it out. If you can use the DRT, by all means use the data retrieval tool. And you know, there will be a couple other questions on there. One of the questions a lot of our students deal with is child support. They ask both for child support paid and child support received. 99 times out of 100, it's not the amount that's court ordered. You know, you're either getting more or you're getting less, or paying more or paying less. So we would suggest contact the Child Support Enforcement Agency, find out exactly, ask them, how much do I get? If our students are selected for verification, we're going to ask them to go get a printout from the Child Support Enforcement Agency so we can double check that.
Shad graduates, he'll be 18, so there'll be no more child support.
And if there's not, that's fine. That's fine. You know, there's one FAFSA form and 20-some million people who fill it out. So it's in one form. They try to have as many different situations as possible, but obviously it could change. Some people, their family income changes from the year that's on the FAFSA. Now the FAFSA, they ask you for information from 2 years ago. So for the 2020-2021 FAFSA, they ask for your tax information from 2018. So obviously between 2018 and 2020, things might change. And if your family income drops significantly, contact the school that your child is going to, the financial aid office there, because they have the authority to make adjustments. Now they're not going to make adjustments based on nickel and dime stuff, but if there's been a loss of income, a layoff, something that significantly affects the family's ability to pay for the education, by all means do it. The other thing that the College Financial Aid Office has is the ability to change dependency from dependent to independent. You know, we mentioned there's a difference between guardianship and custody, and sometimes we have students who are in custody of grandparents. The parents are no longer anywhere to be found, and we have the authority, based on documentation, to make the student independent, even though by definition they still might be dependent. You mentioned grandparents. Grandparents are never parents for the FAFSA. Live with your grandparent, and they say, well, couldn't just the grandparent put in the information on the parent part of the FAFSA? No, absolutely not. The government says it's the parent's information that has to go on there. So you fill out the FAFSA, you sign it with your FSA ID, the student signs it with his or her FSA ID. It's processed immediately. It will tell you what your EFC is there as soon as you hit that submit button. The school is going to get the information in about 3 to 5 days. Now, depending on the size of the school, you will hear from the school. From North Central, we're a small institution, and we're going to get with students pretty quickly. You go to Ohio State, they've got 50 to 60,000 students they're dealing with. It's going to take them longer. The other thing is Ohio State is going to say, we want you to get that FAFSA done by January 15th. At North Central, we're going to say we want it done by the first week in July. Why? We're a lot smaller, we're a lot more nimble, we can do things quickly. OSU has so many students they're dealing with, they just have to do that. Now federal aid, they have to give it to you regardless of when you fill out the FAFSA. But they have their own money that they often award to students. A lot of times colleges have their own scholarships, and you don't want to miss out on their deadlines, and they can set their deadlines anytime they want. If you're looking at a private school like Ashland or Worcester, they often give it a lot of their own money, and that's how it makes it affordable for someone like me to send my kids there.
Now, to fill out financial aid, do you do it your junior year or your senior year?
You do it your senior year and every year thereafter.
Junior year, January, your junior.
Yeah, because the FAFSA is 1 year at a time. And right now, we're currently in the 2019-2020 school year. But come next, August, we're going to be transitioning to the 2020-2021 school year. And so if you're a junior, wouldn't be filling it out until 2021-2022, and that won't be available until next October 1st.
Can you send it to multiple schools?
Yes. You can send it to about 10 schools. And then if you say, well, I got 12 schools I want, then after you've sent it to those 10 schools, you go in and make a correction, you take 2 of them off, and you put the other 2 on there. And I'm not sure why a student would do that, but there are students that do that. By all means, any school that you're interested in, you want to have the information sent to them, because they can't do anything unless they have that report from the FAFSA processor.
January senior year.
Okay, any questions? If not, you know, by all means, read through the handout. If you have questions, you know, our number's on there. We'd be glad to talk with you. And you tell me you're related to Shad Creamer, then I'll say, okay, you know.
Oh, no, nothing to do with him.
For this, so I went into the wrong class, the college credit.
Right.
He doesn't need to do the FAFSA stuff for this, right?
Well, College Credit Plus is for students in high school who are earning college credit while they're in high school, and it doesn't cost them anything.
Okay.
So they don't need financial aid in order to get that. But, you know, if they're graduating this year and they're going to be going to college, then certainly that's what this is for. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And again, we encourage anyone who's interested in financial aid and they don't know to call North Central Financial Aid Office. We would certainly be glad to try to answer your questions.